Welcome to the Education Next Generation Conference. We are your hosts. I'm Cecilia Hilkey.
And I'm Jason Hilkey.
And this next interview is a little bit different. It's with Dr. Joseph Lee, and it's just with me. We got to actually do it in person in his office because he lives here locally.
So I got to run cameraman instead of being in on the interview, which is fine.
Yeah.
It's good.
And we get to talk about anger. And I had a lot of insights about anger because it's kind of one of those emotions that I've kind of denied for a little while. And
notice how she looks at me. No, it's great though. I mean, I think it sheds some light on our relationship and just anger in general.
Yeah,
nice.
And how to handle it with kids.
So
Enjoy. Hi, I'm Cecilia Hilkey from Happily Family, and I am so excited because I'm here today with Dr. Joseph Lee. He's a UCLA-trained psychiatrist, and he does mental health classes, and it's really exciting to talk to him. Last week we got into a conversation about anger, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is so interesting, and I would like to share this with other people. So he agreed to just sit down with me, and we're going to maybe recreate a little bit of what we talked about last week, but also build on it because I still had some more questions for you from last week. Do you want to say anything else about yourself, what you do, your background?
So I'm a psychiatrist, at least trained as a psychiatrist. My everyday job is that I have my own private practice here in Redondo Beach. I have a predominantly psychotherapy-based practice, so most of my sessions with people are built around therapy and counseling, not just sort of med management. And in the last, half of my career or so, kind of been teaching myself and learning a lot about things related to not just what maybe mental health and psychiatry traditionally focuses on, which is kind of like when you're at your worst, and the goals and the treatments are to kind of get a person from being, panicked to no longer having panic attacks, or depression to no longer depressed, but instead the focus has been more on health and well-being, so sort of goals that are much higher than that. And in the context of sort of learning about all those things, then it also, I've learned a lot that really kind of applies to, most people, what's normal, what's optimal, what's healthy. And I think out of that, a lot of what I've learned does have to do with, what's a normal emotion? Why do we have feelings? What are they good for? And I think this is, how our conversation ultimately sort of developed, is because, there's a lot of maybe growth in culture and understanding that maybe our whole range of emotions can be good. Not just the ones that feel good, but it could be good to be anxious. It could be good to be sad. But then anger, to a certain degree, but then we come to like anger, where even though we can have this broader dialogue and we say no, emotions are valid, emotions are good, it still kind of feels like, except for anger.
Yeah. Which is what we talked about last week.
Right.
It's easy for me to go through my feelings and go, yeah, I can accept all of these. In kids, it's easy to accept all of them. But anger for me is like a big kind of trigger thing where I'm like, oh yeah, except for that one. Like, let's not acknowledge that. Let's let anger be like the crazy Uncle John that we don't acknowledge at Thanksgiving when he comes over. Like, oh God, I can't believe he's part of our family.
Right.
And yet, what you helped me understand was that there's a real purpose for anger that I was curious about talking today.
Right. And so our conversation, I think we talked about how, in the broader sort of understanding of what emotions are for, that, all emotions are very purposeful, and our emotions provide sort of real-time insight, and also provide a certain amount of energy and motivation to do something about whatever it is that triggered our feelings. And so anger, I think, fits into that mold as well. There's a universal trigger for anger, and then there's kind of like a universal response as to what changes in us when we get angry. And like most emotions, if we appropriately use that insight and those feelings and that motivation and direct it towards the trigger, when we kind of resolve those issues, the emotion appropriately goes away because it's kind of like done its job. And so from that context, that's why anger perfectly fits in the model of all valid, legitimate emotions that are useful and good, because it functions just like every other emotion. And so with anger, the trigger, like for example, every emotion has its sort of typical trigger. With anxiety, for example, we get triggered to feel anxious when we feel like there's harm or potential harm or danger. So that's the universal trigger. All people, when their brain registers like, uh-oh, that could be a problem, or that could be dangerous, or that could hurt me, we naturally and instinctually feel anxiety.
So safety, protective.
Yeah, right. And then as a model for like understanding how like an unpleasant emotion is still good, anxiety then creates that sort of fight or flight response that we kind of typically think of, and with that awareness and with that sort of change in our body and change in our motivation, we either decide that this particular problem is too overwhelming, it would be better for me to get out and leave the situation. That's the flight part.
Saber-toothed tiger's here. Yeah. I can't fight that. I'm gonna run.
Right. So the best thing for me to do is leave. Or the other response, which is fight, which is if I can stick around, fix this problem, resolve it, make it go away, then that's also why I don't feel that there's any more harm, because I've taken care of it. So that would be the fight, right?
I have a spear. I'm going to kill the saber-toothed tiger, and hey, I got dinner.
Right, and I never have to worry about the saber-toothed tiger again because because I took care of it, right? So that's like so that's kind of like the sequence of emotion, right? That there's a universal trigger. It creates this very specific response depending on the emotion. That response is generally very helpful to kind of deal with whatever that initial trigger is. And as we address it, our emotion correctly diminishes because it's kind of served its purpose, right? So then we come back around to anger. So how does that work?
Yeah. So you said that there's a universal trigger.
Right.
So what is that?
Okay. So I think we all know the universal trigger. And so think about, so let's say if you're seeing a kid, right? Kid's just sitting there, and he looks really upset. He's got his body language, his arms folded, he's got a scowl on his face, and you kind of sense correctly that the kid is angry.
Yeah, because I just said, no, you can't have that lollipop.
All right, but let's say it's not you at all, right? So you're not involved. You just see an angry kid, right?
Okay.
And this is the test to show that we universally understand what the trigger for anger is. What's the question you ask that kid?
Why are you upset? What's up? No, that's not the question.
Didn't go well as soon as I said that.
Why are you angry?
True.
What's wrong?
What's wrong? Okay, that's what I was looking for. What's wrong? Okay, right.
I'll eventually get to it.
Yeah, right.
Slow sometimes.
All right, so what's wrong? I think, right? Because typically that's what we instinctually kind of get, that we perceive with empathy that person feels like something's wrong. That's the trigger for anger. That and this includes when we feel angry, is that we have this internal sense that something is wrong. Okay. Now
like justice, right and wrong, that kind of sense.
Yeah.
Or even just something's like wrong inside. I guess it's both.
Yeah, I think it's both. Now, I think talking about some other emotions, if there's something wrong in the world, and we kind of think I'm at fault or I'm responsible for this, and no one else is to blame, then usually the emotion is guilt or regret.
Mm-hmm. I'm smiling because I know where this is going.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. So that's one assessment. Okay, something is wrong with the world, but I caused it. It's my fault. There's no one else to blame. It's just me. All right. Then in that context, the emotion is guilt, which talking about sort of the purpose of guilt is sort of like I feel so uncomfortable, kind of makes me want to like make it right.
Yeah, I want to go back and apologize, clean it up,
right. And I kind of know that until I make it right, I'm just going to continue to feel this uncomfortable, guilty feeling, and it doesn't feel good. And so part of the motivation is the discomfort. Regret is a little bit different. Regret is something's wrong with the world, it's all my fault, and I really feel like there's nothing I can do about it anymore. So instead, regret is sort of a different feeling. You kind of like sit with it, and you think about it. Why did that happen? What could I have done differently? If given the opportunity again, I would be motivated to not want to do that again. So regret is a different feeling because it makes us, and it hopefully leads to things like maturity, right? I can't do anything about it now, but I can learn from this. I can grow from it. And so if I find myself in a very similar situation in the future, I'll do it differently. So because I don't want this outcome again. So back to anger. So anger is something is wrong with the world. And I don't think
it's my fault.
I don't think it's my fault.
It is so never my fault.
And then so in that situation, something is wrong with the world. It's not my fault. I don't feel guilty. I don't feel regret. It's your fault. That's anger, right? Anger, that's the trigger. I perceive that something's not right.
And it's somebody else's fault.
And it's somebody else's fault, or some variant of that, or it's somebody else's responsibility to make it better.
Yeah.
Which is probably why in a lot of situations kids get angry at their parents, for example. That even if they understand that...
parents get angry at their kids.
Yeah, that happens? No. I'm a parent. This is how I'm so familiar with anger.
Yeah.
So with kids, for example, sometimes they get mad at their parents because something is wrong with the world, and they don't necessarily say it's your fault, but they definitely have this feeling, but it's your responsibility to make it better because you're my parents.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm angry at you, because you're just standing there.
Yeah.
Or you don't even know, this realization I've had about, how wrong it is for it to take 2 days for the Amazon Prime to deliver what I want, really. Whatever your kid's upset about. But that's another sort of like path. But those are the pieces to anger, which is there's a sense that something's really, really wrong. And the person doesn't feel like it's solely their responsibility to rectify it or to make it right. And the perception is that other people have either caused it, and therefore it's their responsibility to correct it, to make it right. Or even if it's not their responsibility, or even if they didn't cause it, it's still their responsibility to make it right. Okay, yeah. So this is the nature of anger. And then that gets to how anger functions. And so if that's the context of anger, and then we kind of break it down as to like what is the anger equivalent or fight or flight? Like what is that change?
What's the purpose?
Yeah, what's the change that happens in us? What happens? What's the intention, right? What are we trying to get to happen? Anger is trying to get those people in the world that we believe are supposed to come fix this problem to pay attention, like stop what you're doing, pay attention to what I've just come to realize as to what is wrong with the world. And it creates this mutual discomfort, right? Just like guilt, where I said like guilt, part of its effectiveness is it creates this unsettling feeling, which is kind of a motivation to kind of want to make it right. So anger kind of creates an unsettled feeling in other people, and in a very similar way creates a motivation for them to kind of say, okay, what's going on? What's wrong? And on some level, a motivation to say, it is also in my best interest to help this person resolve their anger, because I know that that's when I will feel better as well.
Which makes sense that it's such a big thing for parents, because we generally feel like we're responsible for helping our kids be happy and helping solve problems for them. And their feelings are going to be particularly infectious for us as social beings. We're going to pick up on their emotions because of the closeness of our family much more quickly than I'm going to pick up on yours.
Right.
But my child's emotions are going to be, they're going to trigger me.
Right.
And make me very uncomfortable, and I'm going to naturally want to engage with them and fix it, because I don't want my discomfort when my 2-year-old is screaming and tantruming on the floor.
Right. Yeah. Now, interesting, you brought up something about how we're in tune with the emotions that people we're close to. But coming back to anger, anger is one of these emotions that you, like, as human beings, we're sort of exquisitely sensitive to, including with people that we don't know. So, most of us have probably had that experience where you might walk into a room and you just kind of like sense that somebody or the whole group is just upset about something.
You can just feel it.
You can just feel it.
Yeah.
And we don't quite understand how all that works, but, as human beings, we definitely have this capacity to correctly sort of like mind read, other people. We do it better with people that we're really close to. But certain emotions, we kind of have a highly sensitive emotional like antenna to pick up, and anger very much is one of these. And I think that part of the reason is, again, going back to the function of anger, sometimes it's not even the people that are involved or caused the problem, but anger also has this capacity to kind of like get everyone who's around to kind of participate potentially in the resolution of the problem. So in that sense, one way to interpret anger as to the person who's angry is what they're trying to accomplish is they're trying to recruit people to help.
Yeah.
That's the end goal.
Engage.
Yeah, that's trying to
people.
Trying to engage people to help, right? Which is why that sometimes, anger ends up recruiting people that are not even necessarily directly or immediately involved in the nature of like the problem or what's wrong. But it's still, and maybe you've had this experience too. You've seen two people arguing, or you're in that checkout line, and then the person in front of you is giving the other person a hard time, and he's really angry. There's almost like a compulsion in us to kind of say, like, to want to like jump in and be a referee or something like that. Not all people, but it creates a discomfort. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, like when other people, like I had this.
Our children actually sometimes try to referee Jason and I.
Right, because it creates a.
Is that too much self-disclosure?
This can be edited.
And we say, no, this is actually how we're working this out.
Yeah, right.
I know it sounds like we're upset.
Right.
We're actually just really working this out.
Okay, but you are upset.
Yes.
But based on our conversation, you are upset,
Yeah.
and that's what they're picking up on. And then this is a good example as to how even people in the environment, based on the fact that they correctly pick up anger being broadcast, that they have some sort of personal incentive to say, if I can help, I'd like to help, because again, part of that is because I know that's actually how it's going to relieve my own discomfort.
Yeah.
By helping you resolve whatever it is that you need to resolve, then I will also feel relief. So anger, interestingly, right, recruits as many people as possible sometimes to kind of say, help me with my problem. Because again, anger is a cry for help.
It's a cry for help.
It is.
Which is probably also why sibling rivalry is so hard for parents to be around. I remember having all sorts of fights with my brother and sister growing up, and it really actually wasn't a big deal to be in the fight, but I know it drove my parents crazy. Now on the flip side, I see what my own daughters do. Sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, that's driving me crazy. I want to help them.
Right.
They're probably actually fine, but it's me, I'm like, oh, this is uncomfortable.
Right. But that discomfort is actually a normal and potentially useful part of what anger is trying to accomplish, to get as many potential helpers at least aware, right? That's the broadcasting, and everyone's kind of like, oh, there's the angry person. So, and then again, what's wrong? There's an inquiry, a curiosity, right? And then there's also, again, some level of personal incentive to say, I'd like to make this better at minimum, just so I can feel better.
Yeah.
Right? So not even necessarily from a compassionate standpoint, but even from a self-motivated standpoint. But in that sense, it works. Right? And also, like, the greater the intensity of somebody's anger, the more likely we're drawn in, we're more likely to be pulled in because of the level of discomfort that it broadcasts to people around. So that's kind of the model as to how anger works. And then we talk about the relief side. Okay, so if anger works and the other person or the people involved kind of check in what's wrong, and you're able to describe to them. All right, so it helps people understand now. Okay, this is what I feel is wrong, and how I've been hurt, and what I think is not fair, or whatever is the trigger. And then now these people are engaged, right? And then if that person says, okay, what can I do to help? And that offer to help is genuine, and you perceive it as being authentic, that's when anger starts to subside, because it's done its job. It's made people around me aware I need help to fix this problem, which I don't think is my responsibility to solve by myself. And so I've gotten people to be engaged. Mm-hmm. Now I've had the opportunity to express why I'm upset, what I think is wrong with the world, with my world right now. And if that also then activates in them this desire to genuinely help me, anger's done its job.
Yeah.
And then we stop. Right? Now, the interesting thing is, it's not that the problem actually needs to be solved, because that's not the goal of anger. The goal of anger is to just get help. Mm-hmm. And when people do engage in the help, anger starts to diffuse. That's the closed loop of anger. And that's how it's supposed to work.
Which makes so much sense. And it's really something that can only close the loop if we engage with empathy and compassion towards that other individual,
right,
child or adult that's having those emotions. If we come at it with sometimes the response that I'm suppressing in my head is like, you shouldn't be angry about that, or
right,
something else.
Or you shouldn't be angry, period. And that's actually a big challenge.
Or you shouldn't be angry,
Nobody should be angry.
Nobody should be angry.
Nobody ever gets to be or should be.
Yeah. So if I come at it with that response, it's not going to close the loop at all.
Right. In fact, it's going to escalate
the situation.
Because anger is trying to get a person to help. And you're specifically saying, because you got angry, I'm going to disengage.
Yeah.
And so that other person's biological hardwired response is like, well, now I've got to get more angry to now get you to engage, right?
Yeah.
So it's actually worsening the problem in the sense when you disengage, right? But again, it's common for us to disengage with people who are angry because, one, we judge it in a certain way. Like, you shouldn't be angry based on what, including after you told me why you're angry, right? That's nothing to be angry about, and it's dismissive, right? And then so you said, I heard you, but I'm not going to help, right? Which then keeps that person angry, because now anger hasn't done its job. So anger tries harder.
Yeah.
So anger gets bigger.
So I can say in those moments where I'm being empathetic,
mm-hmm.
even if I don't agree, I can say, oh, that makes sense, that this thing is upset you.
Yeah.
I get that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to be like, oh yeah, that I agree with that.
Right, right.
and then I can shift to like, what can we do?
Yeah.
The anger can subside.
Right. And there's a reality too, because it's not actually, anger's not trying to like make the wrong right. It's just trying to get the help in doing that. So I think once you feel heard, right, here's what I think is wrong with the world. And again, like that person genuinely you believe is there to help. Usually in those moments, you're not so rigid in saying like, and you got to help me in this specific way, right? Because that's actually not the goal. If the person really says, well, I can understand how that upset you, but if they give an explanation that validly says, if you saw it this way, then maybe it wouldn't be so upsetting, right? Mm-hmm. That could also work, right?
Once I've felt heard, I can understand your perspective a little bit better.
And you trust that person is genuinely there, again, to help.
Yeah.
They could say like, I see it differently, so, and if you saw it differently, then maybe you wouldn't be so upset. Or if you specifically say, I'm angry and this is what's wrong and you should, and then you come up with something that you think they should do. But again, they're genuinely engaged. They're really there to help. They can say, well, I kind of hear your idea, but I don't know. I don't think that's going to work. But I do have a better idea, and this is what I think could work better. Even in that context, because again, the goal is help. You can say, yeah, I'm angry. Of course my idea is bad. I can't think straight. You know, your idea sounds better. Thank you. Then again, because the goal is to get help,
Yeah.
you're actually pretty open to receive, you know, another idea, a different strategy, different perspectives, because that's what you really need in the moment. You're looking for assistance. You know, you're not looking to, you know, be right. You know, you're not looking to make the other person feel bad. You're not looking to do that. Like, the genuine motivation is that, like, I'm in a place where I need help. You know, this is not something I should or can solve on my own or something like that. You know, somebody else is supposed to help me with this.
Yeah.
And so when that person genuinely helps in, like, helpful ways, that's a better idea. That makes more sense. You know, I didn't see it that way. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It is potentially the response very shortly after, you know, the person engages when you're angry, you know? Because again, if they're meeting your need, what you're looking for, that's actually, you know, that's kind of what you're looking for.
So what that requires is that for that listening person to be able to hear whatever the upset is about,
Yeah.
and for it not to trigger anger in themselves.
Right.
They at least need to be enough in the higher parts of their brain that they can stay calm and centered.
Yeah.
Even if somebody is saying, it's your fault that Amazon Prime hasn't delivered my toy, my
They said
Transformer.
2 days.
They
Why
said
is
2
it-
days.
It's the third day.
So now we're joking about that. But
Right.
that would be an easy one for me to say.
Except that is
it's
real
not really
in
my
my
fault.
household.
It might be real in your house. That would be an easy one in my house for me to be like, that's not really my fault. But I might feel bad if I don't know, like I was saying, yeah, you're done with your video game time, and they're like, Mom, why are you being so mean?
Yeah. Right.
And I might be like, dude, you've already gone over your video game time, and I've been really generous. Let me even let you do video game time before homework. And really, what?
Right.
Like that? Not really, but that could trigger some upset for me.
Right. Right. And then and this is sort of like the complex dance with anger now, because sometimes the way in which people are angry with us, now we feel like we've been wronged.
Yes.
So
I was being extra nice to you.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of why potentially and probably commonly somebody's anger can trigger the anger in the same loop as us.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so what's wrong? Well, I didn't like how you spoke to me when you were angry, right? So that's what's wrong, and that's not my problem to fix, right? Because that's your problem to fix. So I'm not going to talk to you until you ask me nice or something. So
yeah,
so that's the dance, right? The anger dance. Unfortunately, that is pretty common and makes sense. But hopefully, in the context of what we're talking about, it makes sense as to why this is happening. And it goes back to what you said earlier, which is okay. So it does require a certain sort of approach and skill to work through when someone's angry sort of at you. Yeah. That's kind of what we do with anger.
Yeah.
Like anger automatically, we're like, oh, downstairs. You're all limbic. Nothing we can do about it. Got to give you some space. You got to calm down. Nothing can be accomplished while you're angry. But that's not true. That's a certain range of anger. But that's not any different than there's a window of, let's say, anxiety that we agree is integrated between our limbic system and our higher reasoning, right? Problem solving, it's resolution. We can be stressed and anxious in a good way, where our downstairs brain and our upstairs brain is working together. Anger, very similarly. There could be a part of our limbic system that absolutely triggers and activates the anger, and at the same time, we can use our higher reasoning. We can be thoughtful about other people. We can do our perspective taking. We can regulate our emotions while angry.
So it's not just it's not an either or.
It's not an either or.
And
just like all emotions, there's a healthy window where it's functioning exactly like it's supposed to. So anger is not automatically, oh, you're upset, nothing can be accomplished that's good while you're upset. Or we did that to ourselves. I'm angry, nothing can be accomplished. I'm useless while I'm angry. I can't do anything. I can't parent. I can't have a conversation with a person. I have to blow off some steam. I have to calm down.
I want to talk about that calming down part, but I also, since we got into some more brain stuff, do you want to do a real quick, like, triune brain and explain those levels so that the conversation that we had just makes sense?
Okay, right. So I think I said upstairs brain, downstairs brain. So our brain is kind of built in layers. There's like there's a brainstem part of our brain, which if you use the Dan Siegel hand model, the brain looks like this. And so the brainstem is like your wrist, and that's really the most basic physiological functions. It regulates our circadian rhythms, our breathing, our heart rate, stuff that's totally automatic. And that's kind of the part of our brain that's not that different than like something that's a lot more sort of biologically primitive, like a lizard, right? Next layer up is the limbic system, which in this hand model would be the equivalent anatomically of this sort of deep structure buried inside your brain. And the limbic system has some functions that we normally think of that like mammals have. So there's a attachment and the social aspect to it. Emotions as part of motivating factors. So a lot of emotions, especially things like anxiety, anger, get initiated and by that part of the brain. But there are some limits to that part of the brain. That part of the brain tends to be skewed in its judgment based on, past negative experiences. That part of the brain tends to make snap judgments. This is either good or bad. And that's all useful, from a sort of survival standpoint. If I'm really in a dangerous situation, I got to make quick decisions. I just got to decide, is this good or bad? And then I got to act.
Reflexive.
Yeah, so it's very reflexive. And then the third layer, so that's when I said downstairs brain, that's kind of what we're talking about, the downstairs brain. But again, it's useful, it's normal, it's part of how we function, part of how we function well. But there's a third layer, which is our cortex on that hand model. It's this layer above it, and that's that wrinkly gray stuff that we normally think of or when we see a brain, in a picture. So that's the cortex, and that's a lot more sort of complex stuff. And especially the front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which would be this region, which anatomically sits right on top of the limbic system. So it has some control over that emotional, instinctual, reactive part of our brain, and that's a good thing.
The prefrontal cortex says, calm down, it's okay.
Yeah, right.
Limbic system, you don't need to be upset about that.
Right. So the prefrontal cortex is sort of the most developed in humans, and so some of our highest functioning, including our ability to soothe our emotions, our ability to regulate our feelings, our ability to coordinate the different parts of our brain, which is why I said earlier, emotions are meant to be used in conjunction with, right? So it's not an either or. It's not like either I'm emotional or I'm rational. We're actually ideally meant to be motivated, and that the insight and the motivation comes from that sort of limbic part of our brain, and then the planning and then the problem solving comes from, like, let's say the more sophisticated parts of our brain, and it works together, to function optimally. So it's meant to be coordinated. And so the upstairs brain is sort of controls the rest of the brain, right? But we're not actually saying like leave the downstairs brain and then go only and be like hyper rational and intellectual. And
we don't want Spock.
We don't want Spock, no. right? But we actually want to be blended. We want to be integrated. We want to use our feelings, the motivation and the insight and the awareness and the sense of urgency that comes from that, coupled with the part of us that can sort of think and plan and sort of see the layers of complexity that can be a little bit more genuine and authentic and grounded in reality. We want to use all of that. Right?
Yeah.
So that would be when we say the upstairs brain. Right? Is that
perfect?
Okay.
So now getting back to this thing about we're going to do better if we stay in the situation, even if there's anger, if we can regulate ourselves enough to
Right.
stay with the angry child
Mhm.
or to stay with the angry spouse
Mhm.
and be in a calm space, that is kind of the optimal situation. Is
Right.
what
In a
talked about.
present and regulated space, because I think calm is not part of the experience of anger, right? But again, that's part of the incentive. Part of the incentive in most unpleasant emotions, partly how they work, is they create a level of actual discomfort in us. And the reason I bring that up is because you're not actually trying to get into a place of calm when you're trying to help somebody with anger. It's normal to feel uncomfortable while you're trying to help somebody with anger, right?
Calm is not the goal quite yet.
Yeah, right.
The goal is problem solving.
Right. And calm will come if you're effective
with your problem solving.
With your problem solving,
Yes.
helping the angry person, or helping, getting what you need when you're the angry.
Yeah.
When you're the angry person, calm is the natural outcome of anger doing its job. And I bring that up too because I think, if we say like, okay, you need to be calm before you can help somebody who's angry, you're actually not likely engaged with that person who's angry. So that right. So you're actually on the right track when you're kind of like empathy. You're the state of empathy is that you're kind of mirroring the other person's state, right? And so if you're actually like with an angry person to help them, you should actually feel discomfort.
That's the root of compassion, is being with pain, with the feeling.
Right.
Like, not that you have to take all of that in, but there's a, I don't know, that there's like a give and take. There's a connection that I would have.
Right.
That makes sense. I get that.
Right, but there should like, if you're actually doing it right
in myself.
Yeah, if you're truly with somebody and you're there to help, there should be a discomfort actually in you, not a sense of I'm calm now, I'm ready to help you with your anger, and again, that's part of the mutual incentive to kind of like invest in getting better, helping, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It does.
So one of the things we talked about is that it's better to stay in the situation rather than, let me go blow off steam.
Right.
Let me go.
Or you calm down.
I'm going to put you in a timeout.
Yeah. Right.
Until you're calm.
Right.
And then we can talk about this.
Right.
Because what happens when people go their separate ways to calm down? Talk about that. Is that effective?
Generally not. I think if it's not like a mutually agreed plan, then almost never, right? If it does come across like we can't get anything accomplished because you're angry, so I'm going to leave, that person is actually more likely to get more angry.
And they feel rejected.
They feel rejected. What they were setting out to do with
didn't
that
fulfill its purpose of getting the engagement.
Right. And so just like anxiety, where if whatever you've done hasn't quite solved the problem, you're ignoring it. Okay, that's probably the better analogy, right? You kind of know that here's a problem, and you're like, let me ignore that. Your anxiety doesn't go away; it tends to stay, or it grows.
If you try to repress it,
ignore it, it's not going to spontaneously go away. It's going to stick around, and it's probably going to grow because that emotion is trying to say, well, if this level of emotion didn't get you to do that, maybe this level will, right? So not that differently when we're talking about anger, it's like, well, if this level of anger didn't accomplish your engagement, and in fact, I see you leaving, and if you're a kid, like, maybe if I throw something at your head, to let you know that that's not okay with me. You're supposed to, right? And then, unfortunately, in different ways, if you throw something at someone's head, they're going to turn around and they're going to come back, right? But the problem is, they're probably angry too, right? So that's not the best strategy, but it kind of makes sense as to why things tend to escalate sometimes when people attempt to disengage during anger.
Yeah.
So, and that's not to say that there isn't a range, and this definitely has to do with why I think a lot of people are very uncomfortable with anger or scared of it. It's because either personally or we've seen it in other people, we've seen that end range of anger. And it is genuinely scary. Violence, people get hurt.
Destruction of property.
Destruction of property. And correctly, we've seen like nothing, and this part is true. I can't imagine anything good can come out of that kind of level of anger, right? And I think that's true. But I don't think it's correct to judge all of anger, right, based on rage. Just like, we shouldn't judge useful anxiety as being all bad if we've had an experience of a panic attack, which is, again, an extreme version, of anxiety, right?
Yeah.
Which, and we can agree, like, with a panic attack, that's not a useful, that's a paralyzing, not useful anxiety. And similarly, we're agreeing that rage is not a useful version of anger. But that doesn't mean that the rest of the range is not exactly what needs to be done or felt or used in most situations.
Lots of times anxiety is useful if I'm feeling anxious about, I should, practice for my public speaking thing, or I should, be putting more money into my 401k.
Right.
That is,
exactly.
for me to solve that problem.
Right.
It's natural for me to have a little anxiety to take care of it, and very useful.
Right, correct, right. And so,
but the panic attack, when I'm doing the public speaking, is not useful.
Right, exactly. And so similarly with anger, like, that's why we do want to avoid that level.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of times because we think, that anger inevitably will go there, or we just overinterpret all anger is that, that's why we feel or believe that, okay, so maybe the best thing for us to do is to calm down, right?
It's just repress all anger.
Yeah, right. Never be angry. If I've gotten angry, I've blown it. I've lost all chance of being heard or understood. And I'm a bad person. I'm primitive. I'm weak. When we do this, right, we judge ourselves. Or you're weak. You're primitive. You're,
I never do that.
Yeah, right. So beliefs, right, about anger kind of make us disengage, and but again, the just because rage is genuinely scary, not useful, unhelpful, damaging, hurtful, doesn't mean that we dismiss all of it.
And what you're saying is really also providing a really nice justification for saying empathy works.
Yeah.
Empathy will bring that person back and calm the situation very quickly.
Right.
I've even heard of stories where somebody was in a really kind of rage bad place and came out of that because of getting an empathetic response from someone.
Right.
It sounds like that anger is a very social emotion in that it requires a social response. And if we say, you're bad, or non-verbally say, you're bad, you have to take a time out, or go leave the room, that we're not allowing that social solution to happen.
Right, which is part of the intention of the emotion is to engage, right?
The pain.
Engage a relationship, engage help, engage people and so when we disconnect, it is contrary to the opposite of the intended goal, which then makes sense as to why it escalates. It escalates,
Yeah.
Right, and I know that's kind of weird to think about, because we really don't. We don't think of anger as like a social emotion.
Yeah.
But that is a good way of reframing it, to kind of really think about it differently, which is that's exactly what anger is.
Yeah.
It's a pro-social emotion.
Yeah. So in this way, a lot of parents get concerned that, if I give my child attention when they're angry, when they're upset, then I'm encouraging it.
Right.
And we're not saying that just because a child is upset that you're going to get what you want.
Right.
Do you have anything else to say about that? Like, it's still about, I'm going to give you empathy for your upset. You're upset. Joey, you can't have a lollipop.
Right.
It's right before dinner.
Right.
You're not going to have a lollipop. You can have that after dinner. And I can be engaged with you, and I can understand your pain.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that I'm going to say, oh, okay, fine, you're upset. I guess you really want it, so I'm going to give it to you.
Right. But I think if you engage, you validate. I know you're really upset, and then the person is heard. What's wrong? Well, I really, really want a lollipop, and I don't want to eat dinner. Okay. Okay. So I hear you, because lollipops taste better.
They're yummy.
They're yummy and they're good, and that makes sense. You have a better chance of being heard by that angry kid, though, if you at that moment you're genuinely there with them, empathy, right, connected, validating, and in that context, you're more likely to be able to then say, "So tell you what," because it's more important for your body to have a good meal, and so. Dinner's coming up soon. If you can wait, have dinner. You can have the lollipop right after dinner. Make sure you brush your teeth and floss. But you're more likely to have the agreement or the connection from that kid because they got angry and you actually came in there and you didn't judge and you didn't. Anger was not the focus, but the need. The context, what they wanted, what they felt was wrong became the focus. That in itself, I think, probably de-escalates some of the anger in itself.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, because of that, then maybe they're more in that space of angry yet reasonable.
Yeah. The problem doesn't go away.
Yeah, right. The problem doesn't go away. Right. And then, like I said, once people are in that space where they genuinely believe that the other person is there to help, and it's not their adversary, it's not trying to make their life more difficult or make the wrong more wrong, but genuine, like, okay, you're here to help. There is a receptivity to other ideas, other plans, other ways of handling, like, how I'm wrong, So I think, and that's one of the things we shouldn't underestimate, that we can reason and think and process and understand while we're angry. We really can. It's, again, our mental images of rage, but that's not fair because anger is not rage in the same way that panic is not stress, so that's not quite the same. So,
yeah.
Something else you said made me want to, I think it's pretty common to kind of talk about anger as the second emotion.
Oh, yeah.
Right,
yeah. In a lot of parenting circles, they talk about anger being a complex emotion, and there's usually something else underneath that.
Right. And I think that is true. But I'm glad we kind of had this more, we had this part of the conversation where we first said that anger is legitimate. Because I think one of the problems that kind of happens in application when people hear that anger is this secondary emotion is that people are like, oh, then we can just dismiss anger, right? Whew, good thing, we don't have to deal with that. Let's just,
Let's find out what's underneath
let's
find out. When you've really shown that there's a legitimate need for anger, there's a purpose for it.
Right. Yeah. And typically, sometimes maybe what we don't realize that we've accomplished is that, in a good way, when we kind of think past the anger and what's really going on here, we still end up doing the same thing that anger is trying to accomplish. Is we get an engaged parent or an engaged other person who's then curious and wants to help, And but that's ultimately, I think, the reason why the anger diffuses in those situations. It's not because you've successfully bypassed anger. It's actually you worked through it because you engaged, you demonstrated compassion, a willingness to help. And so if you've already had those experiences where you say, well, somebody got angry, then I looked past that and figured out what was the first feeling that they had, and we worked on that, and then that's why things got better. Again, it's better to understand that the reason why that probably worked well as to why the person stopped being angry was because even then anger did accomplish its goal. And if you probably thought about how those situations worked and you break it down, it was probably very much because the person got angry that you kind of stopped what you were doing and you're like, what's going on over there? And again, so anger did accomplish it, right? So anger had a very useful role in all those anecdotes that we think about where somebody got angry, I got to the primary feeling, and all was good. If we really kind of broke down the timeline, it was somebody got angry, which caused me to pay attention, get engaged. And then as I was engaged, then we were able to, but anger worked.
Yeah.
It was probably very necessary in that little anecdote to actually get to that result where the person was heard and the problem was solved and the need was met. So
yeah, and I've seen that happen in the classroom. Sometimes a kid will yell and scream and like make a big fuss, and then the whole classroom, like all the kids are like, "Whoa, what's up?
Yeah,
how can we help? What's going on?"
Yeah,
it totally changes the dynamic of what's happening in the space.
But what I love about that little example you gave is that it shows that instinctually we know what to do when people get angry. What's wrong? How do I help? And really, if that could be just like the one takeaway as to like the shorthand version of the strategy as to what we can do when somebody else is angry, right? If we can, that's what we're trying to do, right? Get in there. What's wrong? I'm here to help. What can I do to help? Even in that sort of generic way, that is very specifically, again, what anger is trying to accomplish. And that's probably going to go a long way to kind of get to that resolution. Diffuse it, right? I'm here. You have my attention. I'm listening. What's wrong? I'm here to help. And I think that's a shorthand version of what we can do for anger.
I love that.
Yeah. So
I think we can wrap up on that.
Okay. Sounds
I'm
good.
here. What's wrong? What can I do to help?
Right. Okay. Good.
All right.
That was a good conversation.
Thank you.
Welcome. I enjoyed it.
Me too.
All right.